Close your eyes and let your mind drift backward, past the glow of city lights and the hum of modern life, to a time when the land was vast and quiet. The air here is thin and clean, crisp with the scent of sagebrush and pine. We are high in the Rocky Mountains, in a hidden valley tucked away from the rest of the world. This is the home of the Shoshone, the salmon eaters, a people who have lived in harmony with this rugged landscape for countless generations. The light here is gentle during the late afternoon, painting the steep canyon walls in shades of deep purple and soft gold. A crystalline river cuts through the valley floor, its steady murmur a constant lullaby that fills the silence between the calls of distant eagles. In this serene, isolated world, a girl is born around the year 1788. We do not know her birth name with absolute certainty, but history would come to know her by a Hidatsa word meaning bird woman Sacagawea. As a very young child, she sleeps safely within a willow-framed wickiup, wrapped in the soft warmth of woven rabbit skin blankets. The low, melodic voice of her mother drifts through the dwelling, singing ancient songs about the sun, the moon, and the great coyote who shaped the land. The fire in the center of the shelter burns low, its embers casting dancing shadows on the hide walls, and the smell of drying salmon and crushed pine nuts hangs heavily and comfortingly in the air. The daily life of her childhood is a rhythm of gathering and gentle migration. In the spring, the women dig for bitterroot in the softening ground, their wooden digging sticks making a soft, rhythmic thumping sound that echoes across the meadow. Sacagawea learns to weave baskets from the tough willow branches, her small fingers working the fibers with an ease that suggests an innate connection to the earth. The mountains are not just a backdrop for her, they are her identity. She learns the language of the wind, noticing how it shifts direction before a storm. She memorizes the shape of every peak against the sky, using them as celestial markers to guide her family from one campsite to the next. These early lessons are absorbed without formal lessons, woven into the simple fabric of every day. As she grows older, the beauty of the high country becomes her most profound teacher. She wades into icy streams, her bare feet perfectly adapted to the rounded, freezing stones, to check the willow traps set for trout. The water is so clear it seems to magnify every grain of sand on the riverbed. Looking down, she sees her own reflection shimmering like a spirit in the water. High above the valley floor, the sun ignites the snowcaps on the distant peaks, turning them into blazing spires of white fire. But for all this dramatic beauty, her world is one of profound equilibrium. There is no rush here, only the slow, deliberate progress of the seasons. In the vast silence between the mountain walls, a single bird song can sound as rich and complex as an orchestra. There are moments, too, of pure, quiet joy. During the warm summer moons, families gather in broad circles to share the season's bounty. They pound chokecherries into a pulpy paste, mixing it with bison fat to make pemmican, the dense, sustaining travel food that can last for years. Sacagawea's laughter mixes with the others as she chases grasshoppers through the tall golden grass or sits patiently beside an elder, threading delicate shell beads onto a necklace. These shells, traded from far-distant Western tribes, are precious treasures, evidence of a vast network of peaceful exchange that spans the great, unknown continent. Touching them, she feels a connection to the ocean, a place she has never seen but which her elders describe as a great, endless lake of salt. The peace of this mountain sanctuary is profound, but the world outside is shifting. Rumors spread through the villages like smoke through a forest canopy. Hunters speak of other tribes pushing inward, armed with weapons never seen before, made from a strange, shining stone that crushes rather than cuts. These stories are unsettling, a discordant note in the harmony of the valley. Yet, for Sacagawea, the immediate world of the senses remains unchanging. The scent of mint crushed underfoot, the velvet weight of a blue grouse in her hand, the soft, guttural language of her people whispering around the evening fires, these anchor her to a reality that feels eternal. She does not know that this deep, sensory intimacy with the shining mountains will soon become the most vital resource a group of strangers could ever hope to possess. One autumn day, the air turned strange. A sense of stillness falls over the camp, the kind that precedes a sudden, violent change. Sacagawea and a few other women are gathering wood along a creek bed, their shadows stretching long and thin in the low-hanging sun, when the brush explodes with movement. There is no time for the pleasantries of trade or the measured cadence of a formal council. The attackers, a party of Hidatsa raiders from the plains, strike with desperate speed. Their faces are painted dark with mud, their movements a blur of horseflesh and hide. The serene cadence of the mountain creek is shattered by a cacophony of voices, a sound of confusion and terror that rips through the thin air. Her world, which moments before was defined by the gentle sound of water and the quiet rustle of dry leaves, turns into a whirlwind of motion. She is taken. The capture is immediate and irreversible, a violent separation from the towering peaks that hold her earliest memories. There is no fighting back, only the sensation of being lifted and carried at a breakneck pace down the treacherous slopes and onto the open, terrifying expanse of the Great Plains. The mountains, her natural compass and her spiritual home, grow smaller and smaller on the eastern horizon as the horse gallops onward. As the sun sets, burning the sky a deep, melancholic orange behind those receding peaks, a profound silence settles over the young girl. She is a child of the sagebrush and the bighorn sheep, leaving behind the cool, sharp air of the Rockies for the heavy, humid silence of the lowlands. It is a journey from light into shadow, a prologue to an epic history she never sought but was destined to shape. The world now stretches out endlessly, a vast ocean of grass that roils and sways under a sky of impossible size. For a girl raised among the vertical peaks of the Rocky Mountains, this horizontal infinity is both overwhelming and disorienting. The Hidatsa villages cling to the rich, black banks of the upper Missouri River, specifically where the Knife River brings its own twisting lifeblood into the larger flow. This is a settled, permanent world of earth and wood, a stark contrast to the migratory life of the Shoshone. Here, large circular earth lodges squat on the high terraces like firmly planted mushrooms, their domed roofs covered in thick grass. Smoke rises placidly from the holes in their centers, carrying the heavy, sweet scent of parchang corn into the breeze. The girl who once knew only the sharp scent of pine now breathes in the dusty, humid aroma of plowed bottomlands. Sacagawea's new life is not one of cruelty, but of adaptation. She is taken into a new household, where the rhythms of daily labor are entirely different. Instead of weaving willow baskets, she learns to use a heavy stone-based hoe to tend the vast, neat gardens that stretch down to the river's edge. The soil is dark and rich, crumbling easily in her hands. Here, under the watchful eye of Hidatsa women, she plants corn, beans, and squash, the three sisters that sustain the village through the brutal winter months. The work is steady and meditative. Her hands move through the dark earth in a slow, constant rhythm. The sun beats down on her back, but the breeze off the Missouri River is cool and constant. Slowly, the guttural songs of the Hidatsa, so different from the melodic Shoshone tongue, begin to settle into her memory. The view from the high river bluffs is spectacular and soothing. From the edge of the village, she can look down upon the wide, swirling, silver-brown ribbon of the Missouri. The river is a highway of commerce and movement. Bullboats, small round vessels made of stretched bison hide over a willow frame, drift silently past the cutbanks, their occupants fishing or transporting goods. The sound of laughter and conversation drifts up from the water, a constant, reassuring murmur of human presence. To the north, on the distant horizon, the vast herds of bison move like dark, slow-moving clouds over the plains. Their presence is a distant, constant rumble, a vibration felt more in the chest than heard with the ears. Sacagawea learns to grind corn in a large wooden mortar. The heavy pounding of the pestle is steady, hypnotic heartbeat that connects her to the other women of the lodge. It is here, in this place of muddy currents and towering grass, that she sheds her childhood name and becomes Sacagawea, the bird woman. The name is a melody in itself, a description of something light and soaring, a paradox for a girl so firmly rooted in the earth. Perhaps it is the way she moves quietly through the village, as silent and observant as a sparrow hawk. Or perhaps it is the deep, searching intelligence in her dark eyes, an unquenchable spark that not even the trauma of capture could extinguish. She rarely speaks of the shining mountains, but they live inside her like a secret map. At night, seated on the roof of the Earth Lodge under the canopy of stars, she traces the familiar constellations. But her gaze always drifts westward, toward the dark void where the horizon eats the land, toward a home she can no longer see. Life on the Knife River has a seasonal cadence that is almost hypnotic in its reliability. When the ice breaks up on the Missouri in the early spring with a sound like shattering glass, the village comes alive. The winter stores are replenished. The horses, kept in the cottonwood groves, shed their shaggy winter coats. It is during these years that a new figure enters her life, a French-Canadian fur trader named Toussaint Charbonneau. He is a man of the in-between, living in the villages but distinctly European in his manners. He works the river, paddling his pirogue loaded with furs and trading cheap whiskey for beaver pelts and bison robes. The transaction that brings Sacagawea into his possession is unremarkable by the standards of the time, either a purchase or a gambling win, a simple exchange of property that does little to acknowledge the vast depth of her soul. The domestic life around the trading post is a quiet hum of industry. Men sit mending fishing nets near the wooden palisade walls, their fingers weaving waxed thread through the coarse hemp. The silence is punctuated by the distant, rhythmic hammering of a blacksmith repairing an iron trap. Charbonneau's lodge, like all the others, is a sanctuary of relative warmth when the wind howls across the plains. Inside, Sacagawea works the deer hides, stretching and scraping them on a rack made of driftwood. The smell of smoked leather and tallow fills the dim, earthen-scented air. A single shaft of light breaks through the smoke hole, illuminating the swirling dust motes like a cascade of tiny stars. This is her life now, a quiet, invisible existence for a woman carrying the entire geography of the Louisiana Territory in her mind. Then, in the crisp air of the autumn of 1804, a profound stillness settles over the Mandan Hidatsa world. A silence that seems to hold its breath, waiting. The river, usually quiet, seems to tremble with a new energy. Sacagawea hears the news before she sees it. The traders speak in hushed, excited tones of a great party of strange men moving up the river. They are not French traders, but soldiers from the East, sent by the Great White Father of the mysterious Eastern Republic. They carry mysterious boxes of scientific instruments and speak of crossing the endless mountains to reach the Great Salt Sea. From the high bluffs, she can just make out the dust cloud kicked up by their keelboat as it labors against the current. The arrival of these strangers feels like the turning of a great stone. A door is opening in the wilderness, one that will require a guide not just through the land, but through the invisible world of language and diplomacy. The quiet gathering of winter is about to begin. As the snow begins to fall, burying the lodges up to their wooden entrances in white drifts, the strangers build a fort just downstream. They call it Fort Mandan. Through the muffled quiet of the blizzards and the cracking of the river ice, Sacagawea's presence becomes a quiet topic of conversation for the two captains leading the expedition, Meriwether Lewis and William Clark. They are planning their route into the unknown and know they will need horses from the Shoshone to cross the Great Peaks. Here, under a roof of snow-covered timber, resides a pregnant, teenage Shoshone woman who has already walked the road they intend to travel. It is not a dramatic revelation, but a slow, quiet realization, like the winter sun burning away the morning fog. She holds the key not only to a language, but to the very safety of the mission. And so, as the ice thickens and the wolves howl in the distant ravines, the stage is set in total silence. The winter of 1804 settles over the upper Missouri with a weight that quiets all living things. The temperature drops so low that the trees in the cottonwood groves freeze solid, their sap snapping with sharp, echoing cracks that sound like distant gunshots across the frozen river. Inside the sturdy triangular stockade of Fort Mandan, a sense of patient industry prevails. The expedition's soldiers and voyagers huddle around crackling fires, repairing their equipment and smoking pipes. The air is thick with the scent of burning wood, wet wool, and the savory aroma of boiling venison. Outside, The prairie wind howls mournfully, carving the loose snow into great, rolling drifts that bury the ditch surrounding the picket walls. It is a time of waiting, of gathering strength. And it is into this world of cold and quiet that Sacagawea, heavy with child, arrives with her husband, the trader Charbonneau, to join the Corps of Discovery. The relationship between the Eastern explorers and the young Shoshone woman begins not with grand speeches, but with silent observation. Captain Meriwether Lewis is a man of science, tall and introspective, often found sitting alone at a crude table, meticulously pressing dried plant specimens between sheets of paper. Captain William Clark is the surveyor and pragmatic leader, his red hair a flash of fiery color in the drab winter landscape, his journal always open as he sketches maps of rivers he has yet to see. They watch Sacagawea with a quiet, respectful curiosity. They notice her composure, an innate serenity that the harshness of the wilderness seems unable to break. She, in turn, observes their strange ways, the grinding of ink, the fascination with a magnet, the complex ritual of shooting the sun with a sextant to determine their place on the earth. There is a vast intellectual gulf between them, yet a mutual dependency begins to form in the flickering shadows of the timber blockhouse. The days inside the fort pass with a slow, deliberate rhythm. One of the most peaceful images of this long winter is that of Sacagawea sitting near the hearth, her hands busy with the quiet work of mending. She uses sinew thread pulled through tough elk skin, attaching intricate quillwork to a pair of moccasins. The colors are soft and earthy ochre reds, deep indigos, and pale yellows, derived from natural pigments and porcupine quills. William Clark sits nearby, writing in his journal by the light of a tallow candle. The scratching of his quill pen on the coarse paper is a soft, steady whisper. Occasionally, he looks up and attempts to communicate a basic word, pointing to an object. She quietly supplies the Shoshone term, and he writes it down phonetically. These silent vocabulary lessons are the foundation of a legend. Through these quiet exchanges, the bird woman begins to transform into an indispensable intermediary of worlds. Then, on a bitter, still day in February, the slow rhythm of the winter marches toward a crisis. The air is heavy, and even the smoke from the chimneys hangs low, refusing to rise. Sacagawea's labor begins. It is long and intensely difficult. The men of the fort, accustomed to the violent crashes of nature and conflict, find themselves utterly silenced by the profound, ancient power of childbirth. They wait in the yard, their breath misting in the freezing air, listening to the muffled sounds emanating from the makeshift infirmary. The great explorer Meriwether Lewis, who has read every medical book he could procure, takes on the role of midwife. He is deeply anxious. This young woman represents their only bridge to the Shoshone horse tribes. His careful notes describe the administration of a folk remedy, a small portion of the rattle of a rattlesnake crushed into water, a desperate cure drawn from frontier lore. The moment of delivery changes the very atmosphere of the fort. After a prolonged struggle, a healthy baby boy enters the world. The cry of the infant, sharp and demanding, echoes through the frozen timber walls, a sound of pure life cutting through the dead silence of the winter. Captain Lewis places the tiny child in the arms of his exhausted mother. We know from Clark's meticulous journals that the boy is named Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, but the gregarious red-haired captain, who feels a deep, paternal affection for the child from the first breath, immediately gives him a lifelong nickname, Pomp. Looking at the fragile baby swaddled in soft fur, Sacagawea's expression softens into one of quiet, fierce protection. The presence of the infant changes everything. As the men watch her cradle Pomp, they see not just a Shoshone captive or a trade wife, but a mother. It makes her deeply human to them in a way that mere translation never could. As the ice on the Missouri begins to rot and groan, signaling the return of the spring thaw, the preparations for the great, unknown journey intensify. The keelboat is hauled out of the frozen mud, its white oak hull scraped clean and sealed with pine pitch to make it waterproof for the long haul upriver. The air inside the fort smells of freshly planed timber, hot tar, and the metallic tang of lead being melted down to cast bullets. In these final weeks, Sacagawea's role shifts from passive observer to critical logistics expert. Sitting near the edge of the riverbank, she digs through the hard, frozen soil to uncover the small, onion-like roots known as prairie turnips. She quietly shows the men what is safe to eat and what is not. She shows them how to identify the waxy leaves of the bearberry bush, a plant that not only sustains hunger but purifies the body, a natural medicine hiding in plain sight. In a fateful council between the captains, held in the cramped officers' quarters under the glow of a single lantern, the final decision is made. They will hire Charbonneau, knowing well his limitations as a boatman and his volatile temper, because he brings with him a treasure far greater than any map. He brings Sacagawea. In the quiet of that small room, surrounded by stacks of trade beads, mirrors, and knives destined for unknown tribes, they acknowledge the unspoken truth. The success of their mission to find the Pacific Ocean does not rest on the strength of their rifles, but on the gentle presence of a teenage girl with a 2-month-old infant strapped to her back. She is their token of peace, their living proof to the wild tribes of the mountains that this is not a war party. A woman with a child does not accompany a war party. This simple, ancient truth will be their shield. The departure date arrives on a crystalline April morning. The sky is a pale, watery blue, and the air is sharp with the promise of spring. The great stone and timber gates of Fort Mandan swing open. The heavy keelboat and 2 smaller pirogues ride low in the water, laden with thousands of pounds of salted pork, scientific equipment, and gifts. Sacagawea steps onto the flagstone, her soft moccasins making no sound. She wears a simple hide dress, and strapped tightly to her back in a cradleboard, little Jean-Baptiste sleeps soundly, his tiny face shielded from the low-hanging sun. She does not look back at the only home she has known for years. The wind stirs the loose strands of her black hair as she steps down the steep bank. The mighty river, swollen with snow melt, laps gently at the hull of the waiting vessels. She walks down the narrow plank to the pirogue, and her weight and the infant's weight barely shift the balance of the sturdy dugout. The oars dip silently into the chocolate-colored water, and the current catches them, pulling them steadily westward, into the absolute unknown, into legend. The journey westward up the Missouri River transforms into a slow, liquid dreamscape of unfurling horizons. The current is a powerful, silent adversary, constantly pushing against the square bows of the heavy pirogues. The men lean into their setting poles, their bodies swaying in a rhythmic, almost hypnotic ballet against the force of the water. Sacagawea sits toward the stern, cradling the sleeping pomp. The soundscape is distinctly peaceful, the steady drip of water from the lifted oars, the low, French-sung lullabies of the voyagers, and the splash of a beaver's tail slapping the surface in alarm. The country on either side rolls by in an endless panorama of emerald green. The fresh spring grass covers the bluffs like smooth velvet, dotted with the brilliant yellow of blooming prickly pear cactus and the softer lavender of wild prairie asters. The air, purified by the constant wind, smells of wet mud and distant rain. Her days are defined by a serene vigilance. While the men navigate snags and sandbars, her eyes scan the landscape not with fear, but with a deep, primal recognition. Every landmark whispers a story to her. A particular notch in the distant buttes, a strange outcropping of yellow stone, the path of a dry creek bed, these are the road signs of her childhood captivity. She had traveled this very route years ago, only in the opposite direction, as a captive. Now she is returning, not as a prisoner, but as a guide. She doesn't steer the boat with her hands, but with her memory. When the men debate which fork of a river to take, she simply waits. She points to a landmark no other eye can discern, a faint trail running across the distant hills, a sign that her people's territory is approaching. One afternoon, the serenity of the river is shattered by a sudden squall. The sky turns from a soft blue to a bruising purple-black in a matter of moments. A wall of wind hits the pirogue broadside, nearly capsizing the fragile vessel. The canvas awning snaps in tears, and the heavy mast swings wildly. The panicked shouts of the French boatmen cut through the howling wind. Amidst the chaos, where most were paralyzed by fear or frantically bailing water, Captain Clark reports a miracle of quiet courage. He watches Sacagawea, with her baby strapped to her back, calmly reach into the swirling, freezing water. Without dropping her composure, she retrieves precious bundles that had washed over the side, medicine, trading beads, vital papers. Her movements are not frantic, but deliberate and quick. She saves the very tools of diplomacy that will carry them safely over the mountains. In that moment, she earns the awe of every man on the river. As they row deeper into the heart of what is now Montana, the landscape grows more dramatic and severe. The wide, slow river narrows, and the banks rise into high, sheer cliffs of white sandstone. The evening camps become more visually stunning. They set up on broad, flat sandbars in the shadow of ruins that look like ancient castles. As the sun descends, it ignites these geological formations, turning the ordinary stone into vast, glowing walls of fire. Sacagawea gathers driftwood for the fire, walking slowly along the high water line. The antlers of a sun-bleached deer skull catch the last rays of the sun. She moves through these quiet moments with a grace that is purely indigenous to the land, picking wild juniper berries to flavor the evening's stew of bison meat. The explorers, riding by the light of the dancing flames, note how her presence seems to civilize the wild camp, softening the harsh edge of their military expedition into something resembling a moving, transient village. The daily life of the expedition takes on a ritualistic comfort. Each evening, the hunters ride into the surrounding plains and return with fresh game, pronghorn antelope or fat deer. The men gather in quiet circles, mending their torn leather trousers with sinew thread under the last light of the day. Sacagawea often sits apart on a small ledge overlooking the river, her body half turned to shield Jean-Baptiste as she nurses him. The low murmur of the men's conversation fades into the background, replaced by the maternal quiet of her soft humming. The stars emerge, so bright and so numerous that they cast a faint, silvery shadow on the sand. The Big Dipper rotates slowly over the North Pole, and the river reflects the heavens so clearly that it seems the pirogues are floating not on water, but on an infinite current of stars. Soon, the sharp, cold scent of pine needles returns to the air. The plains are receding, and the great Rocky Mountain front is rising like a wall on the horizon. This is the point of no return. The river here is lined with dark, heavy timber. The silence is deeper, interrupted occasionally by the haunting, cascading bugle of an elk echoing through the deep ravines. Sacagawea's entire demeanor shifts. She becomes more alert. This high country is not just a landscape to her, it is home. She points out the hidden hot springs to Captain Lewis, places where hot vapor rises from the earth to warm the freezing stones. She shows the men how to peel the inner bark of the cottonwood tree, a sweet, fibrous emergency food. Her quiet expertise is no longer just a novelty, it is a rope that is slowly pulling the entire party out of the depths of the unknown and toward the threshold of the Great Divide. But before the ascent can begin, they encounter a vast, deafening roar that changes the very texture of the air. It is a sound so immense it reaches them miles before the sight does, the Great Falls of the Missouri. They round a bend, and the entire world becomes mist and thunder. A series of 5 colossal cataracts drops the volume of the entire river over shelves of ancient stone. The spray rises in a constant, prismatic cloud, drenching the sagebrush and creating a microclimate of brilliant emerald green ferns clinging to the wet rocks. Sacagawea stands on the banks, the spray wetting her face like tears, vibrating through her body. The beauty is terrifying and sublime. For the captains, it is a severe obstacle, requiring a brutal month-long portage around the roaring torrents. But for Sacagawea, it is a signpost. It is a sacred, roaring threshold, one that separates the world of the plains from the world of her birth. Beyond this wall of water lie the shining mountains and the echoes of her lost family. The path of memory leads directly through the mist. Above the thunderous roar of the great cataracts, the landscape transforms into a vast maze of blue-shadowed peaks and narrow, twisting canyons. The air thins and cools, carrying with it the sharp, clean scent of subalpine fir. This is the land of steep walls and hidden meadows, where the sun takes long to rise over the crests and sets early, plunging the expedition into deep, cold shadows. The men are no longer just pushing against a river current. They are carrying their dugout canoes on their shoulders over sharp, jagged rocks of the portage. Their hands bleed, their feet blister, and the ferocious grizzly bears of the plains become a distant memory. The quiet anxiety of getting lost in this geological labyrinth hangs over the Corps like a fog. Yet, Sacagawea no longer just observes the navigation. She begins to direct it, her voice soft but certain. She points to the ancient, barely visible trails used by her people for 1,000 years, tracing a safe path through the unforgiving rock. She begins to notice the subtle signs of her nation. One morning, while walking through a dew-soaked meadow of wild timothy grass, she stops as if frozen. There, half hidden beneath a pine bough, is an old, weathered wicker gathering basket. It is identical to the ones she learned to weave as a child. A few miles later, Captain Lewis spots the faint, scarred remains of a recent campfire, the ashes arranged in a pattern specific to the Shoshone way. Sacagawea kneels in the cold dirt, sifting the ashes through her fingers. Her heart, which she has guarded so closely behind a mask of stoic calm, begins to beat a little faster. She does not smile, for she is too reserved for such open displays of hope, but the light in her eyes brightens. She smells the air, searching for the telltale scent of tanned hide smoke. She knows they are close. The ghosts of her past are solidifying into the living, breathing reality of her family. The critical moment of diplomacy arrives when Lewis and a small advance party spot a lone Shoshone horseman on a distant ridge. It is the first contact between the nation of the Philadelphia White House and the lords of the Rocky Mountains. The moment is fraught with the peril of misunderstanding. A single misinterpreted gesture could lead to flight or violence. The Shoshone warriors, having never seen white men, are terrified by their pale, bearded faces. Meriwether Lewis, laying down his gun, performs the universal sign of peace, spreading a white wool blanket on the ground and laying trinkets upon it, vermilion war paint, brass bells, and a mirror. These objects seem like magic to the warriors. Slowly, cautiously, the chief, Kamiwait, leads his band down from the rocks to accept the gifts. But the trust remains brittle, likely to shatter at any sudden noise. The translation needed is astronomically complex. Lewis speaks English to a Frenchman, who speaks broken Hidatsa to Charbonneau, who speaks broken Hidatsa to Sacagawea, who finally translates it into the liquid, melodic sounds of her native Shoshone. It is a chain of communication with 5 fragile links, any one of which could break. They retreat to a makeshift shelter of willow branches set up on a shaded creek bank. The air is tense. Sacagawea sits on the ground, her baby firmly in her lap, preparing to interpret the most important conversation of her life. She looks at the stern, hungry face of Chief Kamiwait. He is pleading with her, asking for news of the stranger's intentions. Do they come with war or with trade? The fate of the entire expedition, stranded over 2,000 miles from home and needing horses, rests entirely on the quiet words spoken by the bird woman. Then it happens. As she looks closer at the chief's face, leaning in to catch his quiet words, the air seems to leave her body. The hard, rectangular features of the man, the deep-set eyes that mirror her own, the faded tribal tattoos on his cheekbones, recognition hits her like a silent earthquake. She studies the face of the chief's sister, a woman standing behind him, a woman she had last seen running beside a creek bed. With a sudden, piercing cry that shatters the diplomatic silence of the council, Sacagawea leaps to her feet. She throws her blanket aside and rushes forward, tears streaming down her face. The formal translator vanishes, replaced by a lost daughter. She is not an interpreter anymore. She is a sister and a child. Kamiwait, the stoic warrior, is utterly bewildered. He stands frozen for a long moment, staring at this strange woman dressed in Hidatsa leather, holding a half-white infant. Then he too sees through the years of loss. He recognizes the little girl who was taken away in a raid. William Clark watches the scene with profound emotion, his pen recording it as one of the most touching reunions he has ever witnessed. The rigid protocols of military diplomacy dissolve into the soft, human sound of familial weeping. Sacagawea and her childhood friend, the one who escaped the raid, throw their arms around each other. Their sobs are muffled, buried in each other's hair. The other Shoshone women gather around, not as formal diplomats, but as mothers and aunts who have grieved for a lost child for years. They touch the baby Pomp's face with gentle, curious fingers, whispering blessings over him. The trading for horses is entirely forgotten for a time. The sun moves behind the peaks and the camp sits in the deep purple shadow of the mountain, but no one notices the chill. The warmth of the reunion is the only temperature that matters. The Great Wall of the Continental Divide, which had seemed so insurmountable, has been torn down not by a gun or an axe, but by sheer, undeniable love. Yet, the reality of the mission is impossible to ignore. The Shoshone are desperate themselves, hungry and preparing for war against rival tribes who have guns. The temptation for Kamiwait to ride down from the mountains and hunt bison for his starving village collides with the expedition's urgent need for guides and horses. In this painful negotiation, Sacagawea is torn. Her brother begs her to use her influence, to ask the white men to stay and help them fight. But she knows the greater purpose. She makes a choice that defines her historical legacy. She does not abandon the explorers. With a heavy heart, she returns to her seat by the campfire and translates the painful truth. She must leave her newly found family again to lead these pale strangers deeper into the final, dizzying range of the Bitterroot Mountains. The reunion is a fleeting, bittersweet gift. The path to the Pacific has been secured, but the cost is another devastating farewell. As the party leaves the camp, laden with the precious horses that will carry them over the divide, the silence is absolute. The Shoshone stand on the ridge, their silhouettes stark against the pale sky, watching their reclaimed daughter ride away for a second time. Sacagawea does not look back. She cannot. The trail ahead is brutal, a steep, winding switchback known to history as the Lolo Trail, disappearing into a mat of black, moss-hung cedar trees. The fog is so thick it mutes the hoofbeats of the horses. Yet, embedded in this heartbreak is a profound serenity. The great circle of her life is complete. She is no longer a captive heading into the plains, nor a lost girl searching for home. She is a mature woman, a mother, who has just given a map of the stars to strangers and, in doing so, has etched the name of her people onto the very fabric of the future United States. The bird woman has flown home, and now she flies free. The Lolo Trail is not merely a path, it is a ghostly, vertical world of shadow and damp green silence. The horses stumble through a tangled, moss-hung forest where the ancient cedar and fir trees block out the sun so completely that noon feels like twilight. The branches are draped in a thick, pale, hairy lichen that hangs as still as death, wrapping the forest in a shroud. It is the darkest, most difficult terrain the expedition will face. The men shiver constantly, their clothes perpetually wet from dripping branches and melting snow. Food runs out here in this deep, vertical wilderness. The hunger is a gnawing, physical pain that bends men over their saddles. But Sacagawea's presence remains the one constant comfort. She is no longer just a translator, she is a forager of last resort. She knows that survival hides under the rotting log and the smooth gray rock. She teaches them to peel away the soft, edible layer of the ponderosa pine, a faintly sweet paste that is the thin line between life and starvation. Through this echoing, hunger-filled gloom, a subtle shift occurs in the dynamic of the expedition. The deeply ingrained hierarchy of the early 19th century, where a French voyageur outranks a native woman, slowly erodes. The captains consult her on the path. When the snow covers the trail and the scouts despair, losing their way in the identical-looking ridges, Sacagawea points out a flat, wide meadow where she and her people used to camp during the summer moons. It is their salvation, a place with enough grass for the starving horses and a clear stream. The captains call it Traveler's Rest. Standing there, in the clear bright light that breaks through the green canopy, the men look at her with naked gratitude. They are learning that the land is not an enemy to be conquered, but a text to be read, and that she is the only one among them who can read the invisible ink written by generations of agile, mountain-footed men and women. The descent out of the Bitterroot Mountains is a rebirth. The ears pop, the air warms, and the world opens up again. They stumble out of the narrow, dripping conifer shoots and into the golden, dry, rolling hills of the Nez Perce country. The fragrance of the air changes instantly from decayed moss to the sweet, dry scent of bunchgrass and sun-baked earth. The welcoming reception by the Nez Perce is a balm to the soul. These generous, peaceful people greet the skeletal, starving strangers not with suspicion, but with compassion. They bring dried salmon and camas bread to the riverbank. Sacagawea sits in the tall, waving grass on the banks of the Clearwater River, watching the nimble Nez Perce fishermen stand on platforms over the rushing current, expertly dipping their nets into the foaming silver water. The scene is idyllic, a soft, warm pause in the epic journey where the sun finally warms the bones. The party rests, hollowing out new canoes from the massive ponderosa pines, burning the inner wood with hot embers to shape the vessels that will carry them down to the great sea. The air rings with the sound of axes and adzes echoing through the canyon. For Sacagawea, this time is a return to a quieter mode of existence. She washes the dirt from Pomp's face in the cold, clear water, watching the light filtering through the big leaf maple leaves. She gathers smooth pebbles from the river bank, relics of this peaceful interlude. Soon, the boats are slid into the Clearwater, and the swift current begins to pull them even faster toward the west. They pass through the deep, imposing basalt cliffs of the Snake River, the geology shifting into something almost lunar, a landscape of violent black rock smothered in the soft, golden hue of the setting sun. They're in the flow now, moving too fast for portage, carried with breathtaking speed toward the echo of the distant surf. Finally, the Great Columbia River swallows them. This is no longer the intimate, muddy Missouri of the plains, but a colossal, wind-churned monster of a stream, so wide it creates its own weather. The fog here is thick and sea-salty, laying heavy on the water until noon. Sacagawea sits wrapped in a trade blanket, the mist dewing on her hair and her eyelashes. She has never seen so much water moving in one direction. The sound of the rapids here is a continuous, low-throated growl. The air is thick with the circling, crying silhouettes of seagulls, birds she has never seen before. She tastes the air and feels the salt on her lips. The ocean is near. The defining, horizonless expanse of the Pacific is pulling the river toward it with an unstoppable gravitational force. For a woman born of the high, dry peaks of the brilliant shining mountains, this immersion into the wet, gray, roaring atmosphere of the Pacific Northwest is the final frontier of sensation. In November, they run into the massive, heaving tidal swells of the estuary. The river currents fight the incoming tide in a perpetual, swirling chaos of whitecaps. Driving, cold rain falls so constantly it seems the sun has been extinguished forever. The massive bodies of seals and sea lions heave themselves onto the rocky spits, their barking and roaring a primeval sound that fills the gray air. The camp is finally established on a sheltered cove in the misty, towering rainforest. They name it Fort Clatsop, after the local tribe. The shelters are crude, hastily built wooden shacks covered in elk hides, their roofs steaming with the constant drip of the rain. But they have made it. Standing on the wet, packed sand, looking out at the crashing gray waves of the Pacific Ocean, Sacagawea completes a spiritual journey that no other American woman has ever made. She has walked from the center of the continent to the edge of the earth. The winter at Fort Clatsop is a period of profound, almost monastic quiet. The monotony of the dripping rain dictates the rhythm of life. Moccasins rot on the feet within days, and the constant dampness chills the body to the marrow. The highlight of this waterlogged stillness is a rumor that reaches the fort from the Clatsop Indians, a rumor of a great, leviathan fish, a whale, washed up on the beach miles to the south. Sacagawea, who has been denied nothing of the journey, looks at Captain Clark with a quiet, fierce determination. She states simply that she has traveled a great way with the men to see the great water, and now that there is a monstrous fish lying on its shore, it is very hard that she cannot be allowed to see it, too. Her quiet wish is granted. She wraps Pomp tightly in a blanket, and she walks the wet sands to gaze upon the vast, mountainous carcass of the sea monster. It is the final, incredible image of her journey, not a map, not a mountain, but a flesh-and-blood leviathan, proof that the world is infinitely more strange and magnificent than even the Shoshone legends ever whispered. The winter rain falls in a ceaseless, gentle rhythm on the roof of the stockade, creating a sound so constant it becomes silence itself. Inside the damp, wooden barracks of Fort Clatsop, the core of Discovery rests in a state of quiet hibernation. The adrenaline of the westward race has faded, replaced by a soft, gray monotony. The men spend their days hunched over crude tables, performing the quiet labor of preservation. They boil seawater in large iron kettles, the steam rising in thick clouds to condense on the cold, log walls, leaving behind the precious residue of salt they will need to cure meat for the return journey. The air is always thick, a mixture of wood smoke, drying leather, and the specific, salty musk of the tidal mudflats just yards from the front gate. Sacagawea moves through this suspended world like a silent shade, her soft footsteps muffled by the decaying ferns and packed earth floors of the tiny fort. Her days are spent in a gentle, maternal rhythm. She spends hours near the small, smoky hearth, watching the flickering light play over the face of little Jean-Baptiste. Pomp is growing, his curious fingers grasping at the brass buttons on Captain Clark's uniform, a man who has become a devoted, almost grandfatherly figure to the child. Sacagawea works gently on a new pair of moccasins, using a needle made of a sharpened bone and thread of twisted elk sinew. The local Clatsop and Chinook tribes often visit the fort, bringing woven baskets of wapato root and dried berries to trade. They're a coastal people, their bodies thick with warming fat against the damp cold, their heads flattened in a custom that the eastern explorers find strange, but that Sacagawea observes with quiet, respectful neutrality. She understands the language of trade in a way the captains cannot, recognizing the true value of an otter skin or a string of blue glass beads in this specific place. The most profound moment of this wet winter arrives when word comes of the Leviathan on the southern beach. A small party is assembled to trek across the rugged, rocky headlands to find the decaying whale. Sacagawea's quiet insistence on joining this party is a defining act of her personal will. She does not demand, she simply states her undeniable case to Captain Clark, her voice steady and low. She has crossed the mountains and the deserts. She will not be left behind in the mud while the men go to see the ocean's greatest mystery. And so she walks the long, difficult miles over slippery, barnacle-covered boulders and through dense coastal thickets of salal and salmonberry. The journey is brutally difficult, but the air tastes alive with the salt spray of the crashing waves and the screams of the ever-present gulls. She carries Pomp on her back, his weight a warm, constant comfort against the cold Pacific wind. Finally, they descend onto the long, windswept strand. The scene before them is one of utter, primordial awe. The immense corpse of the whale lies half-buried in the black, wet sand, its bones already gleaming white where the local tribes have stripped away the blubber. The sheer scale of the creature is a sermon in nature's power. Men who have seen bison by the tens of thousands stand speechless, staring at the arch of a rib bone taller than a man. Sacagawea stands apart from the group, the wind whipping her damp hair. She looks not at the skeleton, but at the infinite, churning expanse of the gray-blue Pacific. The horizon is a soft, indistinct line where the water melts into the low-hanging clouds. It is the end of the world, the great, salty water of her childhood legends, and she has walked here, step by step, carrying the future of two worlds on her back. The sight fills her not with excitement, but with a deep, soul-settling silence. The following spring thaw brings a flood of relief to the sodden fort. The decision to turn eastward, to paddle back toward the sunrise and the home countries of the plains and the mountains, brings a renewed, quiet energy. The morning of their departure, the air is filled with the scent of new leaves and damp, warming earth. The dugout canoes are pushed off the gravel beach into the high waters of the Columbia. The current that once carried them to the sea is now a brutal adversary, and the men must paddle and pull the boats against it with exhausting, rhythmic strokes. The landscape scrolls backward slowly. The towering black basalt cliffs and the roaring cascade rapids are navigated with the same painstaking care as before. Sacagawea resumes her position in the vessel, her back straight, her eyes fixed on the eastern shore. There is a quiet confidence in her now. She is no longer an explorer tracking the unknown, but a seasoned guide leading a party home. As they approach the Great Fork in the Missouri, the point where they must choose a path back to the Mandan villages, they reach the monumental decision to split the party. Captain Lewis will take one group to explore a northern tributary, while Captain Clark will take the main body south, toward the Yellowstone River. When the captains prepare this final, risky separation, they turn to their most trusted advisor for the final piece of geographical intelligence. Which way will lead them safely home? Sacagawea does not consult a map, for there is no map to consult. She closes her eyes for a moment, visualizing the wide-open bowl of the sky and the shape of the mountains against it. Then she quietly points out the route that cuts through the Bozeman Pass, a wide, gentle corridor through the towering ramparts of the Rockies. She describes the valley with precision, the one that curves beside the river where the cottonwoods grow thick. Her route is a masterstroke of memory, a geographic proof that no compass could ever offer. It is the final, flawless gift of her guidance. The final leg of the journey is buoyed by the gentle, flowering beauty of a high plains summer. The cottonwood seeds float in the air like an endless, soft summer snow, gathering in drifts along the lazy riverbanks. They reach the familiar mud cliffs of the Knife River, and the large, imposing earth lodges of the Mandan villages come back into view. The smoke from 100 fires rises placidly into the sunset sky. The circle is closed. The men of the expedition begin the difficult task of saying goodbye. William Clark, the red-haired captain who has become a second father to Little Pomp, takes Sacagawea aside. His voice is thick with a sorrow he rarely shows. He offers to take her to St. Louis, to educate her son, to give Jean-Baptiste a life of immense privilege in the white man's world. It is a generous promise, a testament to the deep, platonic love he holds for this small family who guided him through the wilderness. Sacagawea listens, her face unreadable, the burden of choosing between two worlds falling upon her shoulders like a gentle dusk. The weight of a final decision settles over the quiet camp. The Missouri River flows past the Mandan villages with the same slow, indifferent murmur it has held for 10,000 years, but for Sacagawea, the sound of the water is now a metronome measuring the final seconds of a grand shared dream. Captain Clark's offer hangs in the air, heavy with promise and peril. St. Louis represents a world of brick buildings, church bells, and formal education for Pomp. It is a world of security, of a life free from the gnawing winter starvations of the plains. But it is also a world away from the wind, the stars, and the voice of her own people. Inside her small earth lodge, she sits in the dim light, tracing the familiar roughness of the mud walls with her fingertips. She listens to the distant, lowing of the horse herds and the gentle laughter of Hidatsa women grinding corn. This is the sound of home. The decision, when it comes, is not a dramatic renunciation, but a quiet, gradual settling of the soul. She will stay with the earth that knows her feet. The farewell is a moment of pure, aching sweetness. The men of the Corps, these hardened frontiersmen and soldiers, line up to say goodbye not to a hired interpreter, but to the heart of their expedition. Their eyes are wet with unashamed tears as they look at the small, composed young woman who saved their lives, who fed them, who walked ahead of them into the unknown. William Clark kneels in the mud to embrace little Jean-Baptiste. The boy, now a chubby toddler whom the captain affectionately calls Pomp, tugs at the red whiskers of the man who has treated him like a son. Clark's voice breaks as he repeats his promise. When the boy is old enough, he will send for him. He will raise him as his own. He presses a small, keepsake medal into Sacagawea's hand, a token of esteem from a white government that never fully understood the magnitude of her silent contribution. Then, the pirogue pushes off. The oars dip into the current, and the figures of the explorers grow smaller and smaller, fading into the silver light of the morning mist. Life on the Knife River resumes its ancient, quiet cadence, but Sacagawea is now different. She has seen the Great Salt Sea and the towering skeletons of stone monsters. She has walked through the shadow of the Cedars and felt the salt spray on her face. The memories settle inside her like smooth, heavy stones at the bottom of a clear river. She resumes the daily work, scraping hides, tending the gardens, and carrying water from the river with the other women. But in the quiet moments, when the village sleeps, she sometimes sits and watches the western horizon. She does not long for the journey, for it was filled with immense hardship, but she carries its lessons. She moves with a quiet authority, a knowledge that the world is vast and that white men, for all their chronometers and compasses, are utterly helpless without the wisdom of the land. Her child, Pomp, grows strong and healthy, his hybrid identity a living bridge between the ancient continent and the new one rising in the east. The next chapter of her life is marked by the slow, inevitable changes of the frontier. The core has left, but the trail they blazed has opened a floodgate. More and more fur trapping parties paddle up the Missouri, and the way of life in the villages shifts. Eventually, Charbonneau decides to accept William Clark's long-standing invitation and moves the family to St. Louis. The transition from the wild, open plains to the cobbled streets of civilization is as jarring as any physical journey. But here, life takes on a different gentleness. Clark, true to his word, ensures that Jean-Baptiste receives a formal education in a small, candlelit schoolhouse. Sacagawea spends her final years here, far from the shining mountains of her birth, yet still deeply rooted in the quiet domestic world. She gives birth to a daughter, and her life becomes focused entirely on the sheltering warmth of her children. She is no longer a guide of geography, but a guide of the heart. The exact nature of her death is a quiet historical mystery, a fading of the light rather than a violent snuffing out. Some records suggest an illness at Fort Manuel Lisa, a sad, lonely outpost on the vast, windy Missouri. Others, preserved through indigenous oral tradition, paint a far more peaceful and enduring image, an old, respected woman living out a long life on the Wind River Reservation in Wyoming, her face weathered and deeply lined like the soil of the earth she loved. In this quieter, softer version of the end, she does not die young and forgotten. She lives to be a very old woman, surrounded by the grandchildren of her tribe. The valleys of the Wind River are a mirror of her childhood, the same sharp scent of sage, the same crisp mountain air, the same eagles circling in the pale blue sky. It is a geographic homecoming, a gentle return to the embrace of the mountains that gave her birth. In the end, her legacy is not written in the ink of treaties or the logbooks of conquest. It is written in the gentle pulse of the rivers she crossed. The great waters of the Missouri, the Clearwater, and the Columbia still remember the soft dip of her paddle. Her story settled into the soil of the American mythology not as a tale of war or discovery, but as a testament to quiet confidence and profound peace. Statues of her cast in bronze stand in city parks today, always looking westward, often with a baby peeking over her shoulder. But the true monument to the bird woman is more ephemeral, more beautiful. It is the image of a young mother, standing in the golden light of an early autumn evening, pointing not a weapon, but an open hand toward the horizon. She is showing the way not just to the sea, but to understanding. So let us leave her there, not in the noise of the city, but in the eternal quiet of the high plains. Picture her standing on a grassy knoll, the setting sun turning the endless ocean of prairie grass into a rippling sea of liquid amber. The sky is an impossible canvas of soft violet and salmon pink. A gentle wind, perfumed with the holy scent of wild sage, stirs the eagle feather in her braided hair. She is holding the hand of little Jean-Baptiste, who is growing tall and strong. The silence here is not an empty silence, but a full one, padded by the hum of crickets and the distant, rhythmic song of a meadowlark. The expedition is over. The maps are drawn. The men have faded into the history books. But the spirit of the bird woman remains, forever suspended in this single, peaceful moment at dusk, walking gently into the vast, luminous, and safe embrace of the American night. Sleep now and drift away on that same wind she knew, a wind that carries only silence and safety and the whisper of the old, untamed earth.